This is Linda Hofshire with the Embedding Evaluation in Libraries project, and this video focuses on using interviews to gather data when conducting an evaluation in your library. Interviews are used to gather rich, detailed information about people's experiences, thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. Unlike surveys, which gather standardized data that are aggregated across a large number of respondents, interviews yield individualized data from a smaller, purposefully selected group of people. You can conduct individual interviews, which are conversations between one participant and one evaluator, or group interviews, which are often called focus groups. This video focuses on individual interviews. For more information about focus groups, you can view the focus groups video in this series. There are two basic approaches to conducting interviews in your library. Some evaluators use a highly standardized set of questions and hold those constant throughout the evaluation process. These interviews are very similar to a survey that is administered verbally. The evaluator asks the same questions in the same order to every person. This approach is referred to as a structured interview. More often, evaluators in libraries conduct semi-structured interviews. In this approach, the evaluator prepares a list of questions in advance and uses those questions to direct the interview. But rather than asking the exact questions in the exact order as planned, the evaluator uses the list of questions flexibly so they can follow the participant's train of thought and ask questions in an order that makes sense for the conversation. To conduct semi-structured interviews in your library, the first step is to develop specific, clearly defined evaluation questions that you will seek to answer by conducting interviews. These are not the actual questions you will ask participants, but rather the broad, overarching questions you want to answer through the use of interviews. Next, you will develop an interview guide that you will use to help you answer your evaluation questions. This is a document that includes your interview questions along with an introductory section and a concluding section. Your guide is the framework you will use to ensure that you are taking a systematic approach when conducting interviews. Preparing your interview guide will help you work out the focus and wording for each question and make sure your overall list of questions is comprehensive. During the actual interview, your tone will be conversational, rather than reading the questions verbatim from the list, and you will adjust the sequence and wording of the questions as you go. But you will use the interview guide to check that the conversation isn't going off on tangents and that you are covering all of the topics with each participant. An interview guide begins with an introductory script you use to introduce yourself, explain the interview purpose and process, and obtain informed consent from the interview participant. For more information about informed consent and a sample script, you can view the informed consent video in this series. To ensure that the analysis of your interview data is systematic, it's a good idea to audio record each interview and transcribe the recording. Therefore, in the introductory script, you'll need to obtain participants' permission. You will need to explain how you will use the recording, who will have access to it, and when it will be destroyed. You then need to directly ask for the participant's permission to audio record the interview. Following the introductory script, your interview guide will include a step-by-step outline of the questions you plan to ask, arranged in a logical order that flows smoothly and groups questions according to common topics or themes. Overall, the goal in asking interview questions is to get the participant talking about their thoughts, feelings, and personal experiences. So, you'll want to prepare open-ended questions that are broader and more exploratory than survey questions and leave a lot of space for participants to answer in their own way. To elicit the richest data from an interview, your questions should focus on concrete, specific details of participants' experiences and in-depth discussion of their thoughts, feelings, and perspectives. You can ask about the present or the past, but it's generally best to avoid questions about the future because those invite speculation and take the conversation away from the participants' personal experiences and perspectives. In the same way, it's best to avoid questions about other people's experiences and perspectives, as those questions also invite speculation. The last section of the interview guide is a concluding section. This is the script you will use to let the participant know you are finished with all of your questions and invite them to share any additional thoughts or comments. You will then thank the participant for sharing their time and perspectives, and if you're providing an incentive or thank you gift, you would provide that to the participant at this point in the conversation. The final step in preparing your interview guide is to ask several colleagues to review it and to pilot test the interview guide. This will help you refine and clarify your interview questions. When it comes time to conduct your interviews, it is important to create an environment where the participant feels comfortable and can fully express themselves. Part of creating this environment is thinking about who the best person is to conduct the interview, because participants' responses will naturally vary depending on who they are speaking with. For example, an interview participant might be hesitant to share a negative experience with the library's book discussion groups, if the interviewer is the person who leads those discussions. During the interview, the evaluator's main job is to listen attentively, patiently, and carefully to what the participant has to say. Interviews are a special kind of interaction where the normal rules of conversation are suspended. Therefore, unlike a normal two-way conversation, you will need to hold yourself back from talking and allow for silence and long pauses. This gives the participant time to reflect and formulate their responses, and it draws out richer, more detailed answers. As the participant is speaking, you'll want to signal that you are listening and provide encouragement for them to keep talking by occasionally nodding or saying, mm-hmm. If you think of a question you want to ask, you should write it down and wait for a natural pause in the conversation. One of the key benefits of interviews is that you can ask follow-up questions and explore new information that emerges. To do this, it's a good idea to first paraphrase what you heard and then ask your question. You might ask for a specific example, ask what the participant thinks or how they feel about an experience that they described, or ask what conclusions they draw from their experiences. The idea is to ask a few thoughtful follow-up questions that elicit detail or invite deeper reflection. It's also a good idea to occasionally rephrase what the participant said and check that you understood them correctly. As you reach the end of your prepared questions, it's important to leave time for the participant to share any additional thoughts, comments, or reflections they haven't yet discussed. This can yield important and sometimes surprising information. Your final step in conducting interviews is to ensure that the recording is securely stored and to transcribe the interview for analysis. To learn more about conducting interviews, you can read Qualitative Interviewing: The Art of Hearing Data by Herbert and Irene Rubin. And for more information about embedding evaluation in your library, visit our website at libraryeval.org.